Hey everybody, this is R&M Media. I'm Rayhan, and today I'm bringing you my first ever book review, and that book is Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. It's the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. Before I get into the review, I just kind of wanted to go over a little bit about my reading journey so far and a little bit of my history with reading. Basically, for the last year and a half or so, I've very much gotten back into reading. And as far as the fantasy sci-fi genre goes, I read the first Dune book by Frank Herbert, which I love. I've read a little bit of Brandon Sanderson, and I've also read two books in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. So I have a little bit of familiarity with it. All that is to say is I also heard of Malazan in my reading journey so far. I've read more than fantasy, of course. And I'd heard that, Malazan is really complicated, really dense, all these things, just to kind of scare people off sometimes, I think, or give some kind of expectation. And so finally this year I decided, hey, you know what? Whatever, I'm just gonna kind of go for it, read the first book, see what I think, and see what all the hubbub is about. So yeah, hopefully I do the book justice with my little review, and I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so I'm gonna just try my best to give a small synopsis of what the book is about. No spoilers, of course. Essentially, what the first book, Gardens of the Moon, is about is the Malazan Empire is kind of on a warpath, and as empires do, they conquer different nations and stuff like that. And so we kind of begin the story at this siege of Pale. And this all takes place on a continent called Genabakis. And so, from my understanding at least, is that the Malazan Empire has taken over what's also called the Seven Cities, and now they're sieging Pale. And then once they siege Pale, they will move on to try and conquer the last of the free cities, which is called Darujistan. And so it's essentially, there's almost not exactly a whole concrete story. It's more of a boots on the ground kind of perspective between soldiers and characters in the city of Darujistan as well. You have somewhat of a main character. His name is Ganos Perrin. I hope I'm saying that right. And he works in the Malazan Empire. He's in their military forces, and he works with the Empress's, they call her the adjunct, and just to kind of help her through things. But you also follow on the Malazan Empire side this group of soldiers called the Bridge Burners, led by Whiskey Jack, and also this mage that's part of it. Her name is Tattersail. Really interesting characters. And then over in Darujistan, you follow what I think a lot of people and I myself refer to as kind of like the Phoenix Inn crew. And you kind of get the ins and outs of, the city over there through that crew. Some of them are in the politics of the city. Some of them are involved in like the Assassin's Guild. Another one is this character named Krupp. He's just kind of this funny guy, but there might be a little bit more to him than that. And another character, he's a thief. And so you just kind of get all these little perspectives and stuff like that. Almost, I would say, if you guys are familiar with the show The Wire, it's kind of like a pulled back look at like a much larger event to come in this like huge world that Erikson has created. And you just kind of get all sides. One of the best things I like is that there's no good guy, there's no bad guy. It's just things that are. And the other thing that I really like as well, kind of like, I think a lot of like Greek stories or Greek plays or whatnot, there's also a lot of gods and godlike beings that are involved, but they're directly physically involved in the world. So you get a lot of things coming all at once. I wouldn't say there's an overarching narrative besides that the Malazan Empire is on its warpath to take over as much territory and as many cities and countries and what have you as possible. And it's about all the people, all the chess pieces kind of caught in the middle of it. So yeah, that's pretty much what it's about. So now I just kind of want to get into some of my thoughts about like the story, some of my favorite characters and stuff like that, and you know, Erikson's writing in general. So to that, I think Erikson's writing is really kind of similar to Frank Herbert's in terms of structure. I wouldn't say his description is like Herbert's, but he definitely does the thing like Frank Herbert does with Dune, where you'll get multiple perspectives from a character or characters within a scene, and he likes to kind of switch mid paragraph, or sometimes even depending on what he's trying to convey, he might even switch like timeline linearity within the same paragraph, especially in like the first 40 or 50 pages. I noticed that, and it was kind of, you know, taking me aback a little bit, but in a good way. The other thing I really appreciate is that even though my reading of fantasy is still pretty limited in like the last year and a half that I picked up reading again, really, Erikson definitely writes in a way that feels very more akin to literature or classic literature. I'd say maybe even a little bit of like Cormac McCarthy with his descriptions. You know, sometimes you might have to reread a passage, or you're definitely gonna have to look up some words and stuff that he uses, because you know, his vocabulary is much more vast than my own for sure. But I really enjoyed that as a writer. One thing I'll say in regards to the first book as well, while I think I maybe understood 65% of the story as a whole, I don't think it's as challenging as I kind of read up about in regards to the first book and about the series as a whole. I think it reads less straightforward than the stuff I've read so far, where there's a lot of info dumps and stuff like that in regards to the world or characters or whatever. And, you know, sure enough, there are a few here and there info dumps, but for the most part, Erikson really takes a show, don't tell approach to a lot of things. And he also respects the reader's intelligence in regards to, hey, you know, I will get to this later when you need to know, or the fact that, hey, I trust you to infer certain things based on these clues that are within the text, whether these details are large or small. Now I want to just kind of talk about also some of my favorite characters in the story. So Ganos Perrin, you know, I said earlier he could be considered, I guess you could say, as close to a protagonist in this first book as possible. I just really like his journey from the beginning of the book, which it's not really a spoiler. Like, you meet him as a little kid, and you know, he really wants to be a soldier in the Malazan Empire, and then you kind of pick back up with him when he's a soldier, and you kind of follow that journey, at least in this first book, as it goes through when he's, you know, an adult. I think he'd probably be about 20, 22 or something like that. And you just kind of see the realities that he would face with that. On the flip side, though, I really like Crocus's story in Darujistan. He's part of the Phoenix Inn crew. That, I think, is a little more classic, where it's like, you know, he's a young kid. I think he's like 17 or something like that, and he's a thief. And it's just kind of a fun coming-of-age kind of story in and of itself. Crocus does make some mistakes or does some stupid stuff, but for me personally, it's very fun to read. And the last character that's probably my favorite is Ralik Nam. He's an assassin. I'll say, and this is probably one of the flaws in the book, I didn't completely understand his motivation in helping a certain character, because I just don't have the back history of it. But overall, Ralik Nam as a whole is just a really cool character, being part of the Assassin's Guild, and he probably has maybe my two favorite fights in the book. Really well, you know, described, but like to the point. So I very much enjoyed that. And then, you know, as far as the overall story of Gardens of the Moon, though, I really quite enjoyed it. There's a lot of things that I was confused on, but as a whole, I enjoyed it. So now I just want to talk about some questions I think I had, just, you know, for myself reading it. Um, I won't get into too much. I won't get into spoilers or anything like that. I guess I have more or less questions in regards to a certain um, object near the book that our characters find, and kind of just a little bit more details on that. And there is a certain character. That's actually one thing. There's a certain character in this book that has such a ridiculous power level that it can almost seem like a Deus Ex Machina. But I trust Erikson. He knows what he's doing. I'll say this much, that not everything within the book is just like kind of what you think, like fantasy, like, fire and ice magic and swords. Sometimes he definitely delves into the realm of like different realities and even completely different physical realities where certain characters, meet a type of conclusion, I would say. And that's kind of interesting to me. I hope he elaborates further on that, and I'm very much interested in that. As far as like flaws and stuff in the book go, because not all books are perfect. Like I said a little bit ago, he does have a few moments where it's either seeming like a conveniently like, hey, this thing is there, or this event happened, or like this character just happened to be there, and sometimes it comes off that way. But for a book that is so extremely dense and stuff like that, I think sometimes, yeah, these things can happen. They can get lost in the shuffle. So for me, while it is a flaw, it's much more easily digestible for me because of just how dense the writing is in general, and dense in like a necessary way that adds to the fiction. Yeah, but besides that, I would say this book, if you are looking for something new as a fantasy reader, or you've heard about this series for, quite a while, but you're a little scared to kind of dip your toes into it, I would highly recommend that you just kind of, take the leap. Like, it's completely worth it. As far as the, books I've read goes compared to this book, it is, I would say, in my opinion, like, the most immersed I've actually been in a book. I've read some of The Wheel of Time. I've read some of Brandon Sanderson's work. I've read some of the Witcher books. Dune, obviously, I've read. However, sorry, someone was calling my phone. Dune, obviously, I've read. However, besides Dune, I don't think I was ever, like, fully feeling like, oh, hey, I'm completely in this world. Like, when I'm reading, I kind of just, like, forget about everything else and whatnot. But this book, really, it felt like I was playing maybe something like Skyrim, or well, I hate Skyrim, but you get what I'm saying. Like, I was playing like a game, maybe like an immersive sim or something like that, and I really felt like I was in this world. So yes, I would highly, highly recommend checking this book out. It's not a perfect book, but it has a lot of strong things going for it, a great narrative, and very interesting characters. And I think I'll definitely be continuing the Malazan series for sure. I mean, I think you see some of the books back there. So that might be a slight spoiler. I don't know when I'll, get these reviews out. These are long books, and I am a slow reader. But I'll also try to maybe have some reviews for other things in the meantime as well. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and, go read some fantasy books, guys.